A warm welcome to you, dear students. Today, under psychology, I'm going to teach you criminal psychology, which is part of your semester 5. The paper code is PSD 104. The unit today we're going to cover is theories of crime. Under this unit, I will teach you on addiction to crime and Isaac's biosocial theory of crime. This is module number 16. My name is Ms. Faye Pinto, Assistant Professor from Carmel College of Arts, Science and Commerce. For today's outline, you will study two different types of theory, the addiction to crime and Isaac's biosocial theory of crime. By the end of this module, you will understand how crime can be considered an addiction. You will also learn how biological and social factors combine to influence criminal behavior. Okay, so let's start with the first theory, which is addiction to crime. Now the question remains, why do criminals persist in criminal behavior despite its serious consequences? The basic observation here is crime can have many similarities to behaviors that are classified as addictions. But how, you might ask? No substance is being introduced, no change in metabolism, or even brain activity has been identified. Now, the reason why you consider crime as an addiction is for three reasons. First of all, addiction, substance abuse, and alcohol abuse all occur concurrently in criminal populations. Okay, so basically, criminals are known to have addiction-prone personalities. So it's not just about them being addicted to crime. They might also be addicted to other substances such as alcohol or even drugs. There is persistence and escalation. Sometimes it can last a lifelong. It can be a lifelong career. They continue with crime their entire lifetime. And third reason is the process of change. The treatment is the same for addiction to crime and also for addiction of other sorts. Now, there are two main models of addiction. The first, the disease model of addiction. The second, the cognitive behavioral model of addiction. Let's look at the first one, which is the disease model of addiction. The disease model of addiction assumes a genetic or biological predisposition. Problem drinkers, they say, cannot be cured. They only have to abstain. Use of a particular substance results in tolerance, and this tolerance then results in more use. A person might even experience withdrawal, which is severe distress and craving. However, once a person is cured or as the disease disappears, the withdrawal can also decline. The next model is the cognitive behavioral model of addiction. Here, basically, there is learning and expectation of reward. If a person believes they're going to be rewarded for a particular behavior, they are more likely to continue that behavior. Similarly, if they believe that if I drink, I can cope with the stress that I'm experiencing, then they find that rewarding and they continue with that addiction. It is even more powerful than the biological explanation. Now, Kilpatrick, in the year 1997, conducted a study on juvenile offenders arrested for car-related offenses, and he found that there were 6 common characteristics that were common to other forms of addiction. The first is tolerance, which is the need for more to produce the same effect. The second is salience, which is increasing the importance of addiction in the lifestyle. The third is conflict. There is awareness of the negative consequences, yet the need to engage in that behavior. Then there was withdrawal. That means there was distress for non-engagement in that particular behavior. There was craving, where there was a desire to re-engage in that behavior. And then finally relapse, where there was reinstatement after the decision to stop or reduce. Similarly, another study was conducted by McGuire in the year 1997 on shoplifting. Again, he found 6 common characteristics with that of addiction. The first is salience, that is the dominance of addictive behavior in thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Second, arousal, where there was a depressed state before engaging and an excitement at the thought or even engaging in that behavior. Third, tolerance, that is increasing the amount for the desired effects. Then there is withdrawal, where there are aversive feelings on discontinuation. There is relief, which occurs for aversive feelings if recommended. And C, which is cessation, which is repetition of activity with the complete reinstallation even after a long period of cessation. Now let's evaluate this theory. The advantages of this theory is it explains the continued involvement in criminality. Second, criminals tend to be involved in a variety of crimes. The disadvantages of this theory, however, is the theory merely describes features of some deviant behavior without explaining why the individual is deviant in the first place. Okay? So let's move on to the next theory, which is Eysenck's biosocial theory of crime. He believed the genetic factors contributed to human behavior. under the influence of environmental or social factors. He believed that genetic variations influence the psychological differences, leading to different propensities to crime. So basically, he spoke about how genetics interplays with the environment or the society to thereby make you behave in a certain way. He focused on four things: genetics, constitutional factors, personality, and environmental influence. Let's look at the first, which is genetics. Eysenck speaks about chromosomes. Men, as we all know, have an X and a Y chromosome. Women, on the other hand, are mainly X and X. Now, people who suffer from something known as Jacobs syndrome basically have an extra Y chromosome. So, a man will be an X with two Ys. Now, men are usually associated with masculinity, and this masculinity means more aggression. So, an extra Y chromosome would imply that this person might be more masculine. However, this theory is, or this phenomenon is rare, so this hypothesis has been rejected. Another study was conducted on twins, and they found that monozygotic twins have a correlation of 0.7 when it comes to criminal behavior, which means that if one twin is a criminal, there is a 70% chance that the other twin will also be a criminal. On the other hand, a study was done with dizygotic twins, and they found a correlation of 0.4, which means there's a 40% chance that if one twin is a criminal, the other twin will also be a criminal. Adoption studies have been conducted where they have found that the adopted child is more likely to be a criminal if his biological parents are criminals. Now, constitutional factors basically focus on body types. Here, he was interested in the body types proposed by Sheldon. Now, Sheldon proposed three body types: the endomorphs, the ectomorphs, and the mesomorphs. The endomorphs are usually the ones who are a little bit larger and round. Ectomorphs are a little bit more lean and linear. Mesomorphs, on the other hand, are more muscular. Now, according to Eysenck, most criminals were of the mesomorphic type of body. Furthermore, he included personality also, under which he had three components of personality: extroversion, psychoticism, and neuroticism. Eysenck states that the criminals that are high on all these three levels of components. Now, there could be environmental influences also. That is a failure of socializing to stop immature tendencies in some individuals. Now, it includes being concerned solely for oneself and wanting immediate gratification of needs. In this sense, he talks about classical conditioning and how it helps in creating an association. Now, as we all know, extroverts, for that matter, are slow in their conditioning. And because of that, socialization can be slow. And this can lead to criminal behavior, especially in the younger population. Then you have psychotics, on the other hand. They have severe mental derangement and a poor grasp of reality, because of which it can result in criminal behavior. Then you have neurotics who are extremely emotional. It makes it difficult for them to socialize and even condition because they're volatile and even hyperactive. Now, in terms of therapy, it depends on understanding the personality in relation to the socialization and conditioning process. The things, however, to bear in mind is research indicates that problematic childhood can lead to criminality, no doubt, even if Eysenck is right about the socialization process. But, however, there are very few concerns that Eysenck basically addressed. Now the question remains, why do some men rape and why others abuse children? So these kind of questions were not addressed. Let's evaluate the theory. The advantages of the theory is that it's remarkable in its scope. It could account for general criminality with emphasis on some patterns of personality of different offenders. Another advantage is it brings together several levels of theorizing. Like I said, he had four different focuses. So he can bring in a genetic angle, a constitutional factor angle, personality, and even the environment. The disadvantage of this theory is however, it lacks complete support. Many psychologists see his theory as being based on flawed data. Furthermore, the social influences are limited only to rewards and punishments. This is the book you need to refer to, An Introduction to Forensic and Criminal Psychology by Dennis Howitt, the third edition. Thank you.